I think, yes. Good morning. It's for us a great pleasure to have this important initiative concerning the 20 years of an important document coordinated by Professor Immanuel Wallerstein and Fundação Calouste Gulbenkian is very honored and also very pleased because of this reflection. And I think it's very important. 20 years after the first important reflection, to revisit the document, to revisit the problems, and we must understand the background, the context, the diagnosis, the messages, the arguments of the report itself. But we have many changes in 20 years. But we have the same preoccupation and the same issue. We must reflect on the dialogue between different disciplines and the interdisciplinary features open the social sciences. That's why we must think and we must reflect on the main changes and also the relationship with other disciplines, such as neuroscience, evolutionary biology, ecology, physics, computer science, and so many others. That's why I must say that for us is an important moment because we have a challenge, a big challenge, to propose new elements to work, an important work of dialogue and of cooperation between different sciences. Thank you very much, and we are sure that the result of this work will be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Good morning to all, and first of all, thank you very much, Guilherme and Oliveira Martins, for this introduction to our conference, for opening our conference in your house. My first thanks go to the Foundation for the very generous welcome, for co-funding this event, for allowing the event to be an open access event, which we're very grateful. And then I need to tell you why it is that you're here. Not only because you decided to respond to the call for papers, or because you decided this is an interesting topic, but we all owe our thanks to Uskali himself, who is part of the organizing committee. It is Uskali, Mäki, Marta, Varanda, and myself. But the truth is that it was Uskali who, over a year ago, called Marta and myself and said, do you know there's a birthday coming up, 20 years, of a very special document from a very special foundation which is based in Portugal. And I must confess that I was not aware. I hope that my Italian background excuses my ignorance. But that is how it all started. And so very special thanks to our colleague for initiating this whole project. And it is wonderful to be here today. It has been an overly successful subscription. I am delighted that so many people have responded to the call for papers, but also to the fact that it's an open access conference. So we will have around 120, 130 people between today and tomorrow, which is a tremendous success because this is a very detailed topic and perhaps not the one that will shake most minds to come to Gulbenkian for over 2 days to discuss things so easily. So I am absolutely delighted with the result, and I must thank everybody, ourselves from the organizing committee, of course, but all the many people who have helped to organize this. And I want to thank you all for being here. A very special thanks to all our keynotes who have accepted to come all the way to Lisbon, some from very far away, and to spend 2 days with us to discuss a tremendously important topic. I also want to say something about the organization INTREPID, which I chair and which is also co-funding this event. It is an European-funded network which focuses on the role of interdisciplinarity in research programming and research funding. And we have been delighted to agree with Uskali, who is also a member of the network, to contribute to this event for its tremendous importance. And now I just want to ask Marta to say a few words and pass on finally to Uskali before our keynote. Thank you.
Tell you this conference in the context of INTREPID. It's a cost action with 27 countries that we have started 1.5 years ago, more or less, Olivia, I think. So we do the thing, what motivated us is because interdisciplinary very much talked about and not so much practiced. And so in INTREPID we have these different challenges, which is understanding a bit more the process of interdisciplinarity, but also enabling change towards interdisciplinarity. So we are facing this challenge for about 1.5 years with a group that's very diverse and very interdisciplinary too. So it takes time. As we know, interdisciplinary takes a lot of time. But just to say that we are really focused on enabling interdisciplinary, and for the next 1.5 years, 2 years that we still have to go, we'll be thinking about how universities, our research centers, our research can change around to practice more interdisciplinary than just talk about it. So we'll be talking about interdisciplinary here, not so much practicing it, but the message that we in the INTREPID in the next couple of years will be really focusing on how to practice interdisciplinarity. And from my experience, the practice of interdisciplinarity needs humility, needs flexibility, patience, and sense of humor. And of course, if you had a little bit of red wine, it also helps. So I hope that these 2 days we'll have all of those, okay? But after this, we keep on having those to really practice interdisciplinarity. Thank you.
Forum, I'll also sit here rather than go to this other place. By the way, my experience suggests that white wine also helps.
White wine? I like more red wine.
Me too, but I've made observations about this. Anyway, let me say something about the background of the whole thing, this event, and then something about its thematic substance and so forth, so as to get us tuned for the proceedings to come. So, of course, the main thing in the background is the 1996 report, and I actually have it in my bag, but I should have waved it here. It's a slim volume. I take it that everybody has read it by now. It might have come as a new thing for some of you, but anyway, already in 10 years ago when we started this TINT thing in Helsinki. TINT is a shorthand of Trends and Tensions in Intellectual Integration. So it's a big and growing group of people, mainly philosophers of science, focusing on the study of interdisciplinarity. So at that time already, 2006, I thought of organizing an sort of anniversary event around this 96 volume, but it was then too late. I mean, then I thought I put it aside for the next 10 years to wait for next opportunity, and this is now. So a decade passed, and then I realized maybe not in Helsinki after all. It should take place right here, where it originated, and in this building too, because I've been in this building several times. It's so lovely. So I'm very, very thankful that this idea has come true now. So what we now have, of course, is then as Olivia suggested already, I contacted them, and then they have done the local persuasion, and it seems that everybody got sufficiently excited to make this materialize. So what we have now is a very hands-up lineup of keynote speakers. The first one hopefully will arrive in time for giving his talk. We received something like 70 proposals in response to the call for papers, and 1/2 of those could be accepted for inclusion in the program. Sophia, I wonder maybe Sophia is still working at the counter or something. Sophia has been helping, has been of great help indeed. I mean, you have witnessed that yourself. Without her efforts, I would have been helpless with this project. But anyway, here we are, and we are going to have a wonderful conference ahead of us. So something about the themes and the substance of the whole thing. The issue, of course, is the idea of opening the social sciences. Opening the social sciences as it appeared as a challenge in 1996 and as it appears today, and as it will appear in years to come. So that's this kind of the temporal comparative perspective will be very helpful. I think when we compare situation in 10 years ago and today, we will learn a lot about how the world has changed and the kinds of mechanisms that keep it changing. So in the 1996 report, the idea was to provide a plea for opening the boundaries between social sciences, or among those social sciences, and between the social sciences and other disciplines, some natural sciences, between the West and the rest, etc. So as to include excluded voices, but that would be within the academia. So that was very much an intra-academic idea. And of course, in this respect, things also have changed a little bit. So how does the situation look like today? Much has happened in the meantime, in these 20 years that have passed. There are, for instance, growing pressures for human natural sciences to get in contact with one another. But this is something that these developments, I'm thinking of two of these developments in particular, did not appear in the 96 volume. One of them is that regarding human agency, us as human beings, there is an increasing call for getting neuroscience, genetics, and those kinds of fields in natural science in contact with the social sciences. So we have new fields like neuroeconomics and the rest of it. And then another line, another direction on which natural sciences and social sciences are expected to get in contact with one another is regarding the sustainability of human practices of various systems, socio-technological and ecological systems, and all that. And that has much less to do with agency and neuroscience and those kinds of things. Of course, ultimately they could also play a role. I'm sorry, my room temperature last night was like below 15. There was no heating. I'm renting an apartment, so it shows. All right, so regarding the sustainability issues, a wide range of natural, social, and human sciences are supposed to be integrated with one another. Here we have climate science, sustainability sciences, and so forth. Okay, and second major development is are these growing pressures for academic science to get in contact with extra academic partners. In one way or another, and these include businesses, governments, NGOs, indigenous communities, and so forth. And of course, this goes under the name of transdisciplinarity or extra academic transdisciplinarity. And there is hardly anything on that in the 1996 report. The third development has to do with the fact that there are growing efforts on the part of science and research policy to invent means for implementing both intra-academic and extra-academic opening. And of course, there are many people here who are busy with either practicing those policy matters or examining them. And we know that the success rate, the rate of these efforts have varied a lot. A lot of failures and some successes, perhaps in this order. And the final development I would like to mention regards these technological developments of digitalization that enable open access practices and things like that. We are going to have a wonderful talk at the very end of the conference by Stephen Turner on just these new things, new developments. So these are some of the things that have happened in the meantime, and they really have changed the landscape and the set of issues and challenges that need to be met both theoretically, empirically, and practically. Okay, regarding the notion of opening itself that appears in the 1996 document, it's a metaphor. I mean, and then the question is, what's behind this metaphor? What was behind that metaphor in the 96 document, and how we would like to deal with this metaphor today, etc. We can employ other metaphors in sort of elaborating that original metaphor of opening. We could think of opening being a matter of tearing down the walls between disciplines, tearing down the walls between science and the rest of society, make it all flat, everybody welcome, and so forth. So this would be a matter of merging disciplines by dissolving them. So we wouldn't have disciplines anymore in the sense that we used to have them in the past. So that would be the radical line of opening, and the more modest one would be thinking of opening being a matter of opening doors, not the whole walls, but just doors. And doors can also be closed and opened again, and so forth. So the traffic between whatever there is, disciplines or science, and the rest of society could be controlled and guided and so forth by opening and closing these doors. Maybe not just opening once there is a door, open that door that already exists, but also build another door, and then start opening and closing that one, and so forth. So that would be a line, a more modest line of keeping the disciplines in place, maybe modifying the disciplines and making them more open for interactions with their neighbors and so forth. That would be a way of helping them interact with one another, exercise exchange between them, and so forth. And then, of course, there's a historical and textual question of which of these did the 96 document propose. Maybe we will learn more about this in a moment. Some people have argued that it's the more radical line, and that's and criticized it for that. Now, thinking a bit more about this opening thing, once the once there is this opening happening, then we should ask what then happens. What kinds of things start flowing between these disciplines or scientific disciplines and the rest of society, etc. And then we should keep in mind that disciplines are not homogeneous. They are not homogeneous regarding their cognitive contents and cognitive styles and standards and those kinds of things, but also there are power relations, power structures that disciplines sustain. And once you open the disciplines, then those power structures start changing, and then we should start thinking of disciplines in terms of their societal or institutional strength or power and those kinds of things. And that might have consequences for what happens when you start opening these boundaries. The same applies to science and society relations. I mean, society is not homogeneous regarding the kinds of agents we have there. They have different roles, different functions, different goals, and different power resources, and all that. And that also has consequences for what happens when you open these boundaries. Anyway, those would be some of the obvious and many other issues that should be on the agenda when we start considering these issues of opening social sciences today and comparing that with the situation in the 1990s. So this conference will take multidisciplinary perspectives to these and those many other issues. As the phrase goes, I mean, the standard meanings of multi, not really interacting much with one another. And the challenge for us is to make it interdisciplinary, more seriously, helping these perspectives interact. So indeed, do interact with your neighbors here. So let's try to implement interdisciplinarity also in this room and the others, and in the corridors and lunches and dinners and after the conference, coffee and tea breaks too. And also after the conference, there will be a huge amount of emails sent between us, and so that's called collective learning by way of interdisciplinary interaction. So much for that. Thank you very much for being here, and I can promise you it's going to be a great conference. Yeah, maybe. I'll check. May I now invite the first keynote speaker, the person who is responsible for this, in a sense, ultimately responsible for this whole thing, for what happened in the early 1990s, resulting in that 1996 document. And the story is not over. It continues. It continues here in this room and other rooms in this building today and tomorrow. Immanuel Wallerstein does not. It would be, I would say, almost inappropriate to start introducing him and his other achievements. He's one of the giants in the social sciences, and I'm sure everybody recognizes that. So I just invite Immanuel Wallerstein to give his keynote lecture for us.
Because I thought I was going to talk at the end of this and not at the beginning of this. But, I mean, I'm not sure what I can say at the beginning. I can say much more at the end. Perhaps I could just say at the beginning how this report came into being at all, the history of creating the report. Actually, it was an idea that I presented to Joan Carassa, who was at that time the head of the responsible person for the sciences in the Gulbenkian Commission, in the Gulbenkian Institute, and he was quite enthusiastic about it. And what I had, the scheme that we had was that we should have people from different parts of the world, from different disciplines, who were at least open to the idea that there was perhaps a problem. And we wanted to have 10 people, because that was about the manageable size of a real commission that really worked. And we wanted to have 6 of them from what are defined usually as the social sciences, because this was a commission about the social sciences. But we wanted 2 from the natural sciences and 2 from what were called the humanities. Well, if you play that game, you have to have different parts of the world, and you have to have different disciplines, and you have to have people with a certain openness of spirit. We didn't manage to include every possible group, but we were a pretty large group. And what happened was we met as a group basically 3 times with a year interval between each meeting. And the first meeting, everybody came. The first meeting was, in fact, let me see now. The first meeting was in. I no longer remember. Wait a minute. It was in possibly in Paris. We had 3 meetings. One was in Paris, one was in Lisbon, and one was in Binghamton in the United States. And the first meeting, we heard everybody. Everybody talked about what they thought might be the issues, right? And this was a very fruitful discussion, but of course it went in all sorts of directions, naturally, with 10 different people, each speaking, and Joan Carassa himself participated as well, so he was a kind of 11th person in the discussion. And anyway, out of the first meeting, by the end of the first meeting, we decided a kind of framework for how we would do this report. And we asked everybody to volunteer or get assigned one little chunk of it. And what they had to do was write a text on that chunk. So we had 10 texts in the end by the next meeting, and we went through those and argued about them and so forth and so on, and pushed people in this direction and that direction, until by the end of the second meeting, we thought we had a framework for how we were going to do that. And then I took the 10 things, and I wrote a single text incorporating into the text these chunks or parts of these chunks that people wrote. And then the third meeting went over that sort of line by line, because we were determined to have unanimity among the group. And so, and indeed, we managed with some difficulty, because there were 1 or 2 kind of difficult people who were resistant to X or Y or Z. But finally, we got formulas that everybody could live with. And it was it was a question of word by word. I mean, every single word was agreed upon by the 10 members of the commission, which when later we tried to get it published, they wanted to fiddle with it. I said, you can't change a single word, not one word in the whole thing, which they were very unhappy about. But anyway, we got our way. Now, what was the message? First of all, why was it called Open the Social Sciences? Because we thought our view of the world was that the social sciences were closed by rather rigid barriers that had been created 100 years earlier and which made some kind of sense within the context of the world reality of 100 years earlier, but for various reasons which we expounded in the text, that social reality had changed, but the disciplines hadn't changed or were very resistant to it. So we call that opening the social sciences. And let me kind of emphasize that this was not an argument for interdisciplinary work. Interdisciplinary work, we thought, was just another way of reinforcing the existing disciplines. If you say you can't discuss X, you can't discuss, I don't know, labor without doing the economics of labor, the sociology of labor, the history of labor, the this of labor, the that of labor, all you're doing is saying you have to have each of these disciplines. And we were trying to say, no, the combination that was put together made sense in the past, doesn't make sense today, and what we have to do, we had a kind of image of you put all of it into one big pot called a unidisciplinary pot, and then you see if you can create out of that new kinds of subcategories that made more sense in terms of current day reality. Now, we had a concern, therefore, about what kind of disciplinary world we wanted to see, but we also had a concern, which I don't think is clear to everybody who reads it, about who would do this reorganizing, because we had to be honest an enemy. The enemy was ministers of national education, presidents and deans of departments and universities, and we even had it in an age category. We saw them as people who were sort of 40 to 55 years of age, thus not yet at the retirement point, but not yet young, or entry point into academic life. And we said part of the world reality of the present is there is less money that the world is ready to spend on educational institutions. There's a squeeze that's occurring. There was this lush time roughly from 1945 to maybe 60 or 65 where there's lots of money, and then suddenly there was this squeeze. And the question is, who is going to decide what gets squeezed? And we thought that the two groups, first of all, the ministers of national education, the presidents of the university, etc., they might have, how shall I say, a budgetary view of what you want to squeeze, okay? And they say, well, let's eliminate this, let's eliminate that, because it'll save us lots of money, right? And we didn't want the decision to be made on what saved lots of money. I thought we wanted the decision to be made on what was the most sensible use of the money. And we were therefore hoping that there would be this surge from middle-range people. Now, there was another problem which we wanted to face up to. you tell someone who is 50 years of age and who is a chair of a department or a dean or something, and you say to him, look, what we're going to do is we're going to eliminate all these departments, merge them into one big thing, come out, and he says to himself, or she says to herself, well, goodness, I've worked very hard to get to the place where I am now, and you're now telling me, just when I've made it, that I should start over? And we thought, that's very unlikely. We're going to get a lot of resistance there. And in point of fact, that is what we did. We got a lot of resistance. Now, the strange history of the social sciences from the moment of publication is, on the one hand, remarkable. It was translated into some 30 languages. I mean, how many things that anyone here has written have been translated into Lithuanian? I mean, there were all sorts of, how shall I say, small language groups that were ready to publish it. In fact, they were quite ready to publish it. We got it published in almost every language we tried to get it published. There were one or two that we never succeeded quite, but we got it. Now, who read it? Very good question. Very good question. We don't really know who read it. We can say, was the book reviewed in journals, and in fact, it was reviewed in most languages, but least of all in English. That showed the resistance was greatest so it was, how shall I say, ignored in many ways in English, whereas in Lithuanian or Greek or Japanese, it was actually read by somebody. But then again, one has to say, sometimes I now still get a request from somebody who wants to translate it into X language, and I say, sorry, it was translated into that language 10 years ago and published, and here's the reference and so forth. So this person who wanted to do it didn't even know that it had been published in his language. So it was read by an unknown number of people. Did it affect anything? Did it change anything? Well, yes and no. It gets cited often on the first, the honorific first page. I mean, it's like in the days of the Stalinist regimes, you had to write on the first page, you had to doff your hat to all the traditional Marx, Lenin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then after page one, you wrote what you wanted to, as long as you did that page one. Well, in some sense, we were being treated that way. We were page one. People doffed their hat, and then they moved on. I still think myself that the report makes an awful lot of sense. I think the situation in the social sciences is not better today, but in many ways worse today, that people have reinforced the disciplines in many ways and created new ones. I see this as a curve. You start with hundreds of names, maybe in the beginning of the 19th century, and you kind of pare it down to fewer and fewer names, so that we argue that by the end of the century there were maybe 6 main names. And then after 1945, what happened is people came along and said, you forgot this, and you forgot that, and you forgot that, so let's create a new center for this and a new way of studying it and so forth. So as I see it, the number of names went down and then started going up again, and they've been going up now for the last 30, 40 years. Everybody insisting that in many ways they were becoming quite rigid about the things that they added in. They wanted to make sure they didn't get lost somehow. So that's where we are. And I came here to hear you people tell me where you think the social sciences are, and then perhaps I could say a few more words at that point of time. But I have to say also that there was another element in the original thinking which doesn't get spelled out enough in the report. It is not only that we wanted to open the social sciences, but we wanted to overcome the 200-year or 250-year distinction between science and philosophy, which we thought was an invention of the late 18th century and is not was abnormal in terms of the history of knowledge. So, but that would have taken another report, which in fact some of us did. So we wrote, there were other things that were written afterwards by the Fernand Braudel Center, but we didn't have that in the original Open the Social Sciences. But we did have good representatives of the hard sciences. Ilya Prigogine was a Nobel Prize in Chemistry and is a leading figure in what sometimes get called chaos theory, sometimes called other things, doesn't matter. And on the other hand, we had people like my good friend, my memory sometimes is now slipping, but in any case, African teaching in the United States. En tout cas, as a representative of a true humanities point of view. So I think I should stop now. I've given you a little of the history and a little bit of the background, and I want to listen to you now.
So just to remind you of of the plan. I mean, we now have an hour for this opening keynote. We have used a bit over 20 minutes, and then at the very end of the conference there will be a panel, a fairly short one. We only have half an hour for wrapping up and giving final comments, and that's going to be you and the other keynotes. That's 4 people all in all. So this is not going to have a lot of time for each. Maybe, given the title that you gave for this opening talk, 40 years later, not 20 years later, but 40 years later, are the social sciences more open? Question mark. That's the title that you gave. So maybe you could say a little bit on this. Are the social sciences more open 40 years later than X?
Look.
By the way, you could also come here and sit,
yes,
if that's more comfortable. And then it's, yes.
Well, thank you.
I don't want to miss
old Tammany joke in the United States of 100 years ago used to say, doesn't matter what they say about you, just make sure they spell your name right. So then my name is spelled right. Are they more open?
Not always pronounced right.
Yes. The answer is yes and no. They are more open in the sense, and first of all, I should have said 20 years later, not 40 years later, but there again, you know, I'm not sure it'll be different 40 years later. There are many, many, many things that are taught at universities or written about in journals, etc., today that were not written about 20 years ago. So in that sense, I suppose it's more open, but it's also more scattered, more there's an underlying layer of anger that's often behind people's arguments, because they are afraid that their particular emphasis is somehow being ignored, squeezed out, not funded. Funding comes, you know, so one of the ways of seeing what's going on in the social sciences is to go to a bookstore. They have a few left somewhere. You go to a bookstore, and the person who runs the bookstore shelves the books somewhere in categories. Now, the categories they use today to shelve books in bookstores are quite different from the categories they used 20 years ago, and even more difficult from 40 years ago, right? So I'm ambivalent about how much more open the social sciences are. Certainly from my point of view, the game is not at all over. And the struggle, and I see it as a struggle, is not at all over. And we've won some and lost some. So on the other hand, here we are discussing open the social sciences 20 years later. That's an encouraging thing. You know, people are, the fact that the anniversary meetings are being held, and I'm being invited to more and more anniversary meetings, the 20th of this and the 25th of that and the 40th of that and so forth, means that people are kind of searching for making sense out of what's going on. They're uncomfortable. On the other hand, when you do convene a meeting, everybody feels that they have to say something original and different from somebody else or other people. And so it's not always clear that there's convergence. Sometimes the meetings encourage divergence. Anyway, so are they more open? I don't know. You tell me.
Maybe you tell him. Any thoughts about this? Are they more open now? It's a big question. By the way, what you said, okay, Menno.
Thank you very much. Now you ask this question, I was just considering this during the talk. I think what you can see is that perhaps there's a bit more openness in economics towards psychology. due to the recent history of behavioral economics, but institutionally there isn't. I'll give an example. I'm from Holland, by the way. If in Holland you try to get a subsidy for research from the National Research Foundation, one of the problems you will face if you have some interdisciplinary ideas is that you don't get the subsidy, because those subsidies are being decided upon within disciplines. So there's all sorts of professors that are being asked to judge your proposal. And then if you have a professor of economics who sees your proposal and you've got a view which is slightly open, they tend to, these people that decide upon those proposals tend not to be the youngest people, implying very often that they are fixed in their disciplines and they won't understand or won't like your proposal simply because of this openness. So I think I know a number of examples of very good researchers in Holland that simply were rejected their proposal on the basis of not fitting well enough into the particular discipline where they asked for the subsidy. And if you go to another discipline with the same proposal, you get the same problem. So there isn't a sort of interdisciplinary team who's deciding upon your proposal. So institutionally, I think, at least in my country, the social sciences are certainly not more open.
Yeah. Well, actually, that reminds me of how I personally got involved in this whole issue. It started much earlier. It was exactly with proposals that the Van Ombrodel Center was sending to the National Science Foundation in the United States. And we discovered, you know, the system in the NSF was that the staff person would send out something if he thought it was minimally interesting. He was a sort of gatekeeper, or she. But if it was minimally interesting, would send it out to 4 outside referees, and if it got and on the basis of that, those outside referees, a committee that the NSF had would decide whether or not your proposal would be funded. And we had the very strange and unusual experience that every time a proposal from us went out to 4 people, 2 of them wrote back absolutely enthusiastic endorsements. You couldn't, you know, the heavens came down. And 2 of them would denounce it completely. It was journalism, it was this, it was that, but in any case, it was not science, okay? So we discovered, right, that we provoked this kind of bifurcation, if you want to call it that, or anyway, this terrible, and that was apparently unusual within the NSF. They didn't usually have that. And we said to ourselves, there's obviously a problem here that has to do with the definition of what is science and what is not science and so forth, and is social science to be taken seriously and so forth. And that's what got us into studying the issue, which later we started studying the issue in mid-70s, and so Open the Social Sciences is 20 years after that. So I agree that the gatekeepers, especially if the, I mean, every country has its own system, right? So I can't, there's not a single system across the world. But wherever you have a system in which you basically have categories which are the traditional categories, economics, sociology, history, etc., 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 then things get vetoed just because they don't fall within the traditional one. So yeah, you're quite right. Funding, in the end, whether the funding is coming from within the university, which is one place funding comes, or whether it comes from national science foundations or national disciplinary foundations, whatever they're called in any given country, funding is the issue, and funding is where people battle. So.
Yep. David Byrne from the UK. It's interesting to look at the UK situation, because what we have as a national funding agency is the Economic and Social Research Council, right, which was renamed from the Social Science Research Council in the 1980s because a demented cabinet minister said there's no such thing as social science, so economics is a science. Now, I think that's operating in a somewhat different way these days, and I'll say something about that in my presentation. But what's most interesting is that I think the largest funder of social science research in the UK at this point is the National Institute for Health Research. Right?
National Institute of
Health Research, right? Because it's faced, what happened was we have a medical research council which spent all its money on fundamental biology, which has neither clinical nor practice implications, things like the Human Genome Project. What the NIHR is concerned with is what it calls translational research. It's concerned with research which will move things into areas of active practice. And given that so much of this is about aging, you can see how the social sciences break down in that kind of area, because you cannot get effective translational research which doesn't integrate both clinical and practice work. And there's a lot of money has come in that direction. I don't know if that's the case in other places, but it's certainly the case in the UK at this point.
Yes. Well, you know, there's another thing that's happening. We inherited a system of categories that go way, way back, in which there was philosophy, which, well, there was medicine, there was law, there was theology, and then there was philosophy. Philosophy was everything else. That's the reason why, to this day, we are PhDs, doctors of philosophy. Whether we are physicists or art historians, we're all PhDs. Okay. Now, what was outside that category was medicine and law and theology. Well, theology isn't as strong as it used to be. But medicine and law are quite strong. And what they are doing is, in many ways, reproducing all of the disciplines within them. So one of the, you know, I have a friend who is a political scientist by training, an open the social science person by instinct or by preference, who teaches within a school of public health, right? And she gives courses on the politics of funding aid to people and so forth and so on. But the point is, she does it within the School of Public Health. And in a sense, everybody is, how shall I say, greedy and taking over everything. But that's actually a plus. See, so the medicine and law want to take over everything. The economists of a how shall I say, a neo-orthodox stripe also want to take over everything, right? They want to say the correct way to do social sciences is to do it as we do it, and so forth. So we'll quantify all of this and so forth and so on. Now, so at one level, everything is breaking down, and whether 50 years from now there will be schools of medicine and schools of law, I don't even know. Don't even know. And the UK thing is obviously the result of a political pressure, first of all, a very important one when Mrs. Thatcher and so forth. But as you say, people got around it, or can get around it. So what the university will look like, that's another question which I've tried to deal with in some of my writings. What the university will look like 100 years from now is a very good question. Will it be the place where knowledge is in fact invented, created, etc., or as it's supposed to be now, but wasn't originally? That is to say, will it be, shall I say, will the university be where people go to reproduce knowledge or just to produce knowledge? Because people are moving out of the universities, right? They're moving into research centers, or they're moving into working within the framework of Benoit Mandelbrot, worked for 20 years and did most of his most important work working within IBM, right? And IBM was happy to have him fiddle. It didn't cost them very much money, but in fact, that's where he got his living until he retired and decided to come back to the university system. But so it may be that the university becomes an irrelevant institution 50 or 100 years from now. In the same way, you know, in the 1930s in Britain, or in the United States as a matter of fact, but in Britain, a scholar in history would have taught in the secondary school, and he would have spent his spare time writing his definitive work on X or Y. And when he finally finished that definitive work, he would get it published, and it would be reviewed. This scholar who worked in the, it would actually be reviewed as a serious scholarly work. But he taught in high schools, in secondary schools, right? Now, those people after 1945 no longer taught in secondary schools because there were too many secondary schools, right? And they were not elite schools anymore. They were mass schools. So he moved into the university and taught in colleges. And then he moved another 20 years later into graduate education only. And then he moved outside, right? So what was happening, right, is what I call the high schoolization of the university, right? And you know, nobody would dream of doing research as a high school teacher. He doesn't have time to do it, and it's not rewarded in any way whatsoever, and it's not where he would be placed. So it is an amazing flux, which I think has to do with the state of the world system, but I don't want to get into that. That's still another another big issue. But what we are dealing with is the world of knowledge. What I call the structures of knowledge are at one and the same time a reflection of the reality of the world system and an important element in transforming or structuring the world system. So it works both ways, and it's always worked both ways, and it is now. Okay.
Olivia.
Thank you. Olivia Bina from the Institute of Social Sciences.
I can't hear you.
Olivia Bina from the Institute of Social Sciences, University of Lisbon. I just wanted to pick up on the last two interventions because it really fits quite nicely with some of the agenda that we are trying to develop within this network called INTREPID, in the sense that we observe and we are interested in the kind of words and discourses that the science policy, the funding agencies that were discussed briefly from the UK colleague, for example, are using. And they embrace the terms of interdisciplinarity quite effectively these days, certainly compared to when you published your report and so on. At the same time, we look at the practice of evaluation of what they plan to fund, and we do encounter difficulties. Our colleague mentioned some. There are many others that have been noted, and therefore there is, let's say, at least a tension between the intent stated and the practice, the very day-to-day chores of picking up a proposal and being able to establish whether it merits funding. And as you said, money ultimately is a very fundamental underlying source here that we are discussing. It makes things then come true and develop. So it's a fundamental issue, and it is a question that we have yet to resolve. How can we move from this state of intention to an effective way of funding what we say we want to fund? But the other thing that I wanted to point out, and you've just touched upon it in your last comment, and it was not part of our agenda explicitly, but it's somehow being forced upon us, is to look back into academia itself, because there is almost, allow me the sort of broad statement of saying that there's almost like a two roads are being tracked here. One is what the science policy and funding agencies say they want, and at the same time there is that wonderful, hugely historically shaped institutions that are academic institutions around the world, especially in the Western countries where they have hundreds of years of history and therefore are very well established in their ways. And so we have this situation where probably there is a high-speed intent to move towards more interdisciplinary research in the science policies, but there is a much less high-speed intention, or at least practice, in the institutions themselves. And the barriers institutionally are maybe something that we need to look at much more rapidly and much more with greater attention than just looking at funding, which is what we in our network were doing. So it's a self-reflection of perhaps that the target needs to be on both fronts. And the question, I guess, here is then, in looking at these multiple challenges, what about the social sciences and the humanities? Because if more and more research is also being done outside academia, and we're talking mainly technology, health-related, what is happening to the social sciences and the humanities? Are they literally losing a home, one way or another, both inside academia, which is losing funding and is therefore having to make choices about where it puts its own money and its restructuring, and outside, how important are the social sciences and the humanities in these new agendas and new locus of research, which is usually also private foundations, but private companies have a huge importance today. So
yeah.
This was just a...
Well, of course, that's you know, it's a plus and a minus in that. the plus is that there are more sources of funds, and if you can't get it here, you might get it there. On the other hand, scholars, and this goes back thousands of years, have an ambivalent relationship with power, whatever power is in a given area of the world. On the one hand, they don't want to feel subordinated by power, and they want to create their distance from that. And on the other hand, they need the money. It's got to come from somewhere. People have to live. They have to have an income, and you have to have money, extra money, if you need to do some kind of research. And so scholars play this game of trying to create distance, but not so much distance that they get eliminated from the scene. And they have to make some concessions to reality. Look, at the moment we're discussing in Europe and in the United States and in many parts of the world so-called populism, right? And that's, in a sense, the same issue, right? It's how much distance you want to keep and how much control you should be subordinated to, right? So can you get outvoted, so to speak, from doing some kinds of research by a political thrust? The politics of this, in two senses of the word politics, are always there. The politics are there in the sense of are we on the left, center, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we want our people to win out, not the other guy's people, and so we may veto something for political reasons, but not say that it's for political reasons. We say it's for some other reason, right? But it's politics in another sense, not in the sense of affecting state policies in one way or another, but politics in terms of who will be strong within the framework of the university or in the framework of structures of knowledge. And so again, we may veto, and that was the point about the ECRC, we may veto something because it weakens my thing within, but I don't say that's the reason. I say the reason is X. I'm old enough to have served on a lot of committees over time which receive multiple requests and you have to decide among them. And I know, I'm quite clear in my mind how easy it is for people to find excuses to veto something they don't like without admitting the real reason in their mind of doing that. That it's just, it's not hard at all. It's not hard at all. And in these small little committees, which maybe in a particular university, in a particular part of the university, where you are living with other people, again, do you want to antagonize people or live with them? That's again an issue, and quite frequently you have to split departments or do something like that because they've run out of tolerance for each other. And you know, think of the issues that come up if you try to appoint someone as a member of your department, either at the lowest level of an assistant professor or at a very high level of a distinguished person that you want to bring in as a, you know, and think of the fights that go on within the department about who you appoint. Sometimes the department is split 8-8, and you're going to appoint a 17th person, it makes all the difference in the world. Those are ferocious battles.
May I return to the, if I take the floor myself, to the earlier issue of disciplinarity and interdisciplinarity in the 96 document. I mean, what you said was that interdisciplinarity would require disciplines, and it thereby would fortify disciplines, and that's not nice. You want it more open. So it sounds like something like post-disciplinarity rather than interdisciplinarity that you're endorsing here in the 96 document. But I take this to mean that the then prevalent disciplines were not sort of welcome to join the party, to be fortified and privileged and all that. But what about discipline in this more general sense? Discipline like obedience to rules, law and order, rigor, and these kinds of things. What happens to discipline in this sense when you dissolve disciplines and you go for a grand unified social science without any boundaries between the currently existing disciplines? And this relates to the very popular skepticism about interdisciplinarity too, that, you know, it's not rigorous, it's not disciplined, and things like that. Many people entertain that kind of attitude, of course. So the question is, in this grand unified science that you're proposing in this document, how are the standards of rigor set? Who sets them, how, and whose standards are they? There was Michael Burawoy, the former president of the American Sociological Association, once put it saying about your previous thoughts that it's already happening, and it's economics that is setting the standards. And that sort of, we have a grand new unified social science that has economics as the dominant power. Do you have any thoughts about this? There were no worries of this kind in this document.
Well, let me tell you something about economics. Yes, the most remarkable thing is to look at a discipline in the United States and in Western Europe called political science. And if you look at political science in the years roughly from 1945 to about 1970, political scientists all were looking with admiration at sociology and trying to emulate it, call it political sociology, and so forth and so on and so on. And then, for a whole series of reasons, they switched sides, and they decided they would look with admiration to economics. Now, you know, and I have colleagues at Yale of my age or near it who are in political science, well, they're retired now and so forth, and they can't even talk to the people who are in the, and they can only bemoan what has happened to political science. Okay. I was at a conference in Houston that was convened by Ilya Prigozhin quite a long time ago, 30 years ago maybe. And the way he set up this conference was he had one person from every conceivable discipline. So he had about 30, 40 people who were for everything from art to astronomy to any, you name it, he had a person there who was from that discipline. I was there from sociology. And the way he structured the conference was people made successive talks That's all that happened. We had the persons from each discipline gave a talk, and after the talk they could answer some questions, and then we would go on to the next person. What was the theme? Doesn't matter what the theme was. I've forgotten by now. After each person spoke, no matter what they claimed their discipline was, I more or less understood the point they were making, and I heard the questions and so forth. The very last person in this stream was from economics, and he got up and he said, look, you think that people in economics are not interested in this kinds of issues. I'm interested in this kinds of issues, and he goes to the blackboard and he puts on the blackboard an equation, and he talks about the equation. I didn't understand a word. I did not understand a word of what he was saying. It turned out nobody else did either, because he was the only speaker that didn't get a single question. Well, there you are. So, nonetheless, things are happening within economics in the last couple of years in which this rigid hold by the I don't know even what I want to call them, the people who control. Well, look, economics as a discipline has gone through itself 3 stages since 1945. In 1945, everyone became a Keynesian. We are all Keynesians now, said Richard Nixon. Okay, we're all Keynesians now. He said that when I was a graduate student, what's his name from the University of Chicago, I mean, even blocking his name, was a joke. Was a joke, right? No one took it seriously, right? All of a sudden, after 1970, it was no longer a joke. He was the definitive God, right? And anyone who was a Keynesian was crazy, right? So we have a period from about 1970 to about 2010 or thereabouts where everybody is I even forget the adjective, a follower. And of course the Nobel Prize in Economics is only given to those people, and so forth and so on and so on. Well, in the last few years, there have been a kind of movement within economics departments which are, I would say, de facto reinstating some concern with social issues. And it's not clear that the Nobel Prize in Economics is going to be maintained in this rigid way that it was. In fact, they already have broken down what's the name of the woman who just won it 2 years ago, and yes. And so how shall I say, the thing you conclude from all of this is the pressures from the real world constantly come in and force things to change in various ways, and we have to push them in the direction we want as opposed to the direction we don't want, but other people are pushing too, right? And that's it.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been lovely, very informative. It would be nice to continue, but unfortunately we have a coffee break right now on the schedule.
Let me make one last point. One of the things that people argue about is language, and Open the Social Sciences is a very clear instance. Since we were funded by the Gulbenkian Foundation. They, of course, wanted immediately a version in Portuguese. So, in fact, the first translation of Open the Social Sciences from English was into Portuguese in Lisbon. Well, as you are probably aware, in Brazil, they do not accept a version of the language that is written in Portugal. So in order to get it read in Brazil, we had to have a second separate translation of the text in Brazilian Portuguese, right? And in Mozambique, they can choose which between them if they wish. Okay. Well, you think that's bad? We have 3 Chinese versions. 3 Chinese versions, because the first version was done in Hong Kong, right? And the Hong Kong version is unacceptable in
mainland China.
In mainland China, in whatever you want to call it, to the Beijing-centered China, and of course it's totally unacceptable in Taiwan. So we have a Taiwanese version, we have a Hong Kong version, and we have a Mandarin version, right? Now in English, although the difference between American English and British English is at least as great as the difference between Brazilian Portuguese and Portuguese. Fact is that for whatever historic reasons, we all, as English speakers, learn how to translate these curious things that are written in British English, and we learn that certain words have to be changed, and the spelling is not O-R but O-U-R, and so forth and so on, and we tolerate it, so that a book published in the United States can be sold in Britain, and a book published in Britain can be sold in the United States, okay? So now we can go around the world and see how many languages you find legitimate within the framework of a name, okay? For Chinese it's 3, for Portuguese it's 2, for English it's 1, okay? And then we have to ask the question, it's not hard to explain why in Portuguese there's 2, because Brazil is so much bigger, so much more powerful, and so many more people. They don't want to be dominated culturally by Lisbon. They want to take over, and they'd be perfectly happy to have Lisbon accept their version. Well, you know, okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Coffee time. Thank you.
Can I ask, sorry, we're a little bit late, so I'll afford you 5 extra minutes for coffee, which means that we start the parallel sessions at 40 minutes past the hour. However, I must ask you, please, those of you who have not registered, to kindly, when you leave the room, turn right. There is a registration desk, and I really need to ask you to at least sign the documents and pick up a program. Thank you. Thank you.